What's up, good people? My name is AJ, and you are watching Straight Talks. Today's topic is coming from a request that I got in a comment to one of my other videos, so I really appreciate that type of stuff. If you have anything that you'd like to hear me talk about or discuss in a future video, please feel free to go ahead and leave that in the comments down below on this video, and like this video, subscribe to the channel. Both of those things help me out, and I appreciate them. And let's get into this one. So I can't believe I haven't done a video about this topic before because it's pretty central to the idea of studying for the CFA program or any other academic program really for that matter. And it's in regards to note-taking tips. So what type of information do you write down as notes? What types of notes are you taking? Do you study over your notes afterwards and all that jazz when studying for the CFA program? Normally in my videos I'll share kind of part one what I did and part two what I recommend everyone else do. And I can't exactly do that here. I want to make it clear that I think note-taking is highly subjective. It totally depends person to person, so please do not take what I'm going to say in this video as what you should do. And the reason it's so subjective is that everybody learns differently, everyone's brains work differently. So all I can really do here is tell you about what I did and why I think it worked for me. But this is certainly not me making the argument that everyone else should do it the way I did it. I actually think that could potentially hurt your studies for the program just because you need to figure out, and I'll talk about this, but I think you'll need to figure out exactly what works best for you and your brain and however your brain most efficiently learns. And I'm going to talk about what I did specifically, and you can feel free to try this out and see if it works for you, but please don't take my words as a hard and true fact on the number one effective, most efficient way to study for the CFA program, because again, I don't think this is a one-size-fits-all answer and you need to figure out what works for you. My note-taking was also really reliant on the Wiley study program, so I've talked about in other videos how I used Wiley I think Silver course, which included their video lessons and also their study notes. And typically I would take my notes from their video lessons, so I'll talk about that. But also in instances where I was like studying on the road or I was at friends or family's house, I was always doing my 3 hours every day. So I would just bring the Wiley book, physical book with me with their written study notes, and I would go through those study notes. Of course, if you're not using Wiley, this will work a little bit differently. If you're using Kaplan, I know a lot of people use Kaplan, then maybe you can copy this format pretty well. Any other study test prep provider, Mark Meldrum, IFT, I know are popular ones. The structures aren't exactly the same as Wiley's structure, which is just a condensed version of the CFA material. So again, this is going to be a little different from everyone, but here's what I did. For whatever chapter of the curriculum that I'm on at that time, I would watch the entire Wiley video. Now, some of those videos were 10 minutes long. Some of them were, I think, 2.5, maybe even 3 hours long. And I'm taking notes based on, number one, the most important things in the video are things that the instructor, the Wiley instructor, puts a little star by or tells you is the most important. Whenever I would hear that, and they don't do that often in the Wiley videos, there are certainly lines in there that they said, hey, this is something that we think is most testable. This is a core concept to X, Y, or Z LOS. So this is something you want to have down for sure. 100% of the time when I heard that, I was writing down exactly what they're writing down on the screen of the video lesson, because the video lessons were like a step-by-step instruction tutorial type style. It wasn't a lecture, kind of like what I'm doing right here. So I could see what they're writing and I would copy that down. And then in my notes, in my notebook, I would keep one college ruled notebook for the entire level 1, one for level 2, and one for level 3. And I would almost fill that notebook each year, but put a little star next to the sentence or formula that they just wrote down. So, and I would put a box around it, just so I knew that that was something that the Wiley instructor said was integral to a certain LOS or a very testable topic. The rest of this is going to be subjective again. I would write down probably 50% of the material that they were conveying to me through the video lesson. I don't want to say you're guessing at what material is going to be more important, but the more and more you study, the better you will get at this. You can just kind of tell when a certain part of a piece of content, a Wiley video lesson, is a type of question that the CFA Institute will ask, or a piece of content that is probably directly from the CFA curriculum, versus something that's a little bit more of an explanation of like why this piece of information is here, or I don't know, something that's not critical to taking the CFA exam. So I think I would just divide it up in my brain a little bit on which pieces of information were more important, or certainly things that I didn't understand, and those were the things I was taking notes on. So I would write paragraph descriptions. I would, if it was a formula, I would write the formula. I'm condensing the Wiley notes, which are already condensed version of the CFA curriculum, into something that I think is more reviewable, and that's an important point. Your notes need to be something that you can go back and review from. Now, if there's ever a formula that's presented in the Wiley video lessons, there's a pretty good likelihood that that formula is needed to answer a question, meaning you're going to need to know that formula if you have a question like that pop up on the exam. So every time I wrote down a formula, I would put a little dash on the side of my notebook page just denoting that, hey, there's a formula right here. And that's important because in the final month of review, when I'm going back through my personal notes that I've taken throughout the year, I need to make a new formula sheet with every formula that I wrote down and used for a problem. So I'm putting little dashes by all these formulas that actually get applied to answering a blue box question, for example, which is one of the things they would do in the Wiley video lessons, just so that I know, hey, this is certainly testable formula, you got to memorize this. And those 2 points I've mentioned so far, putting a star next to what Wiley says is the most important topics, and then putting a dash next to the formulas that are used on certain questions, make it much easier when you're going back through your notes 6 months later, or maybe only 3 months later, and you're trying to pick out the most important parts from each chapter, or things that you need to definitely review in the last month, which is formulas or starred questions. So I think those 2 things really helped me out in saving time and reviewing the most important information later on. It might also be worth noting that in some of the Wiley video lessons, especially in like the statistics chapter, which is called quantitative methods, one of the instructors would derive some of the formulas presented in the CFA curriculum on his own. And there was like 5, 10, 15-minute sections in the Wiley video lessons where he would say, look, you're not going to have to do this on the CFA exam, but I'm just going to derive how they got to the formula here so you understand it better. And I would not be able to follow it at all. I mean, he's doing some pretty relatively advanced calculus in some scenarios just to derive the formula. I'm just thinking, just tell me the formula and I'm going to make my little mark and write the formula down. So all that information I would totally skip, because again, I'm trying to condense this to give myself the best chance of passing the exams. Also in my study notes, I am practicing some of the questions. I've talked about how after I've taken all my notes on each book of the CFA curriculum, later I'm going to go back and do all the blue boxes and the EOC questions, but sometimes in the Wiley video lessons, if they were doing those blue box questions, I would just write out the whole question, the steps to answer it, and then the answer. So really, even though I'm taking notes, I was also doing some practice questions or introductions to those practice questions, even though I know I'm going to have to do them again later. That's okay. I think that's a good use of time. But I want to reiterate one point that I mentioned a little bit ago and I said was really important, and that's that you need these notes to be reviewable. Now, if you're someone who learns just by writing things down, and I don't think that's most people, then maybe you don't need your notes to be all that reviewable. Maybe just the act of taking the notes is going to help your brain remember it and learn that information. But for me, and I think for most other people, in the last 30 days when you're doing your important final review process, being able to go back and look at your notes, which are hopefully succinctly presented versions of the information you need to answer certain questions, it's going to be really helpful in getting yourself to re-remember or relearn stuff that you haven't seen in 4 to 6 months. And then another very important topic is that you need to understand how your brain learns best. And this is going to be really difficult for me to describe. Throughout my level 1 studies, I was not good at this at all because I did not study all that well during college or university. So this is going to differ person by person based on how much experience you actually have studying material and learning that material. But I think the common phrase that people use when they remember or learn something and they'll say, oh, that thing just clicked. There is a very important mental process that happens, and it's usually described by clicking. You need to understand, or you need to teach yourself how to get to that click as soon as possible. So for me, it was typically get the information, write a practice question, and start working through the answer. Normally I wouldn't be able to answer it on my own. Then look at Wiley's description of how you get to that answer, understand what content they're pulling that answer from, and then when you get the content and you start to understand the formulation of the rationale for that answer, I think that's the click. So that's probably a horrible description, and this is going to be totally different. I think everyone's brains work a little bit differently, but I totally believe that it's really important for you to understand exactly how your brain learns so that you can replicate that process in your brain over and over while you're writing your study notes and also later on while you're reviewing them. If anyone can articulate this better than I am right now, please plug a little paragraph in the comments down below and talk about how you can practice doing things in the way that your brain best learns them, because I don't know how to say this other than you need to know how your brain learns and then do things that way. And with a lot of practice, you'll get to that point. Sorry if you can hear my baby in the background of some of these clips. I'm trying to re-record the things when I hear her start making noises, but I don't know if I'll get them all. So if you're not great at understanding how your brain best learns throughout at least the level 1 studies, that's okay, because you're going to get better and better at it, so that hopefully in the final month of review, you will have gotten to the point where you can say, oh, hey, here's a piece of information that I'm a little foggy on. I'm going to look at the description or the information on how this question works and how the answer works. and then I'm going to re-present it to myself in a way that I know I'll be able to learn it. You'll have a better understanding of how you learn once you've done this for 3 to 6 months, so that in the final month review, you can then study most efficiently for your brain. And once you get this right, it's a really cool feeling because you'll be putting forth this effort in manipulating your brain functioning, which is something that probably the majority of people will never do in their lifetime. I know I never did before studying for the CFA exam. And then when it starts working for you, it's kind of like you have this sense of control over your brain and your mental processes, and it's really cool, especially once you see yourself making progress towards being able to answer more and more questions correctly. So I mentioned I was taking notes in a college ruled notebook, and I would just really flip through the pages, more notes, more notes, more notes. Of course, write headers and things when you get to a new book or new chapters or sections, but really I'm just filling up a notebook with hopefully a condensed version of the Wiley study notes in my case, so that I know I'm getting all the information presented to me at least once, and then the final review is really where I start pounding in the practice questions. I'm sure there are a couple things I'm missing in this video, but please let me know if you have any questions on the note-taking process that I used. I think it was pretty straightforward, but a lot of people have cool little tips and tricks that they used, or different ways that they took notes entirely that worked for them. And again, that's why I say this is going to be a little bit different. You need to figure out what works for you before doing what I did, or maybe do what I did to better learn what works for you. But hopefully this video helps someone just a little bit in their studies for the program, and if it gives you any better chance of passing, then I did my job. So thanks for watching.